So where I wanted to start, I just went to unity.org, and there's a page that explains what our teachings are in the five basic principles. What I have here is just a verbatim screen grab of the text, because when I came into Unity in 1984, it was not this simple. One of the things that I have noticed, and it's been a point of some consternation and some challenge, and I think it reflects, though, that Unity is a spectrum. We're not a very narrow group, we're a very broad group. And what I have found is the earlier Unity teachings, the ones by the Fillmores, Emily Cady, who wrote Lessons in Truth, amongst other things, and other early Unity teachers and ministers, tended to use traditional Christian terms. We see them using the idea of God as Father. We see the use of men and man for everybody, instead of being more gender specific or gender inclusive. We see a lot more reference to Jesus as our way shower. And we've kind of moved away from that in many ways. And whether or not that's a good thing, I leave for historians and people smarter than me about those things to decide. What I've noticed for me is that what we have now is something that I can talk to people about in my broader non-church circle, my broader outside my spiritual community. And I'm finding I don't get into fights about whether or not I'm going to hell. I have some family members who believe that I am and are praying for me, and thank you, and blessings on their journey and their understanding. So as you can see on the screen, unity is for people who might call themselves spiritual but not religious. It is for those who sense the depths of their own being and celebrate the awareness of a power greater than themselves. The teachings in unity bring together ancient wisdom with new interpretations of what it means to be alive and human. Unity inspires different ways to think about the force of love and intelligence that many people call God. Some of what you'll find in Unity might sound familiar and other parts brand new. Although the principles of healing and prosperity taught in Unity have been scientifically explained, the ideas must have seemed radical when they were put forth by founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore beginning in the 1880s. And I could tell you that they were not just, radical, they were heretical, they were blasphemous, they were I remember a time when our church at Mississauga was looking to purchase another building, and we walked in, and right inside the door was a chart that explained cults, and Unity was on that list of cults. So that's about 10 years ago. I don't know if we've gotten off the list or if we're still there. I don't really care. None of my business what other people think of us. But it's an idea that one of the key things was that we could grow and move through our understanding that science is catching up to what Unity has taught since the 1890s in terms of the importance of the mind-body connection, the mind-heart connection, the whole idea of being in oneness as a greater community. There's a lot of things that Unity has been teaching that quantum physics is now saying, yeah, we were right about that, which is really interesting to me. So I find that trying to get the languaging then sometimes can become difficult. I came into Unity as a very intellectual person, and I used to get chastised for that. But there was space for me to be intellectual in my spirituality. There's space for people to be emotional or feeling nature oriented because we are on a spectrum rather than as I said, something very dedicated. So unlike some places, we don't have a dogma. The Fillmores were reluctant even to issue a statement of beliefs. I'll talk about that in a minute. They wanted to remain in constant exploration. And this is really important, that things will change as Unity grows and moves, and we come to understandings and we come into spaces where things that don't work anymore, we're quite content to let go of. Sometimes it's kicking and screaming. Sometimes it's with tears and gnashing of teeth. But I have noticed, having been in Unity for 30 plus years now, that there is this real sense of, rather than holding on to the past, that we move forward. And I'm really noticing it right now as we're in this COVID pandemic. that, our ministries are adapting to doing services online only or hybrid with people in the sanctuary doing the service and it being broadcast. That we're learning how to use technology to do spiritual things. We're learning how to express ourselves in ways that reaches a broader audience. I find it really interesting in my own experience as I went through to become a licensed Unity teacher. I had people who were Jewish, I had people who were Muslim who came to our classes because they wanted to learn spiritual practices that their own tradition might not have, wasn't fulfilling in that format. So it was a real blessing for me to be able to have that sense of community beyond the borders of and the walls of my own church home. So throughout the years, they, being the Fillmores, pulled together teachings of truth that flow through all the world's great religions. Later leaders of Unity boiled them down to 5 basic principles. And I really appreciate that we have not only got these 5 basic principles, but the folks at the headquarters have taken the time to put them into phrases suitable for teenagers and suitable for children. And I find for myself that a lot of the time I will go to Unity's children's material first to find out what the underlying principle is, what the underlying idea is. And then I'll go into the adult stuff and just make that jump of languaging, having gotten a handle on what it is that's being taught. So let's go to what we started with. So Charles did in the early 20s write a statement of faith. It is long. It is incredibly fussy. I want to use another word, but I'll be polite. It talks about everything. Now, understand at the time, we didn't have human rights codes that said you can't ask certain kinds of questions. When he became a minister, he was asked if he drank coffee. I don't think many ministers would make it through that question nowadays. But what Charles did say, and this has been misquoted, I have the original quote here for you so you get it in his own words. We may change our minds tomorrow on some of the points. And if we do, we shall feel free to make new statement of faith in harmony with the new viewpoint. However, we are assured there will be no change in fundamentals. And that to me is what's amazing about Unity's 5 principles in the time that I've been in Unity. When I first came into Unity, the 5 principles was about a half page of letter-sized paper in 12-point font. Now you can do it down into 12 words. So it's very much, it changes, it flows as we grow, as we understand differently, as we communicate with each other and discover that the use of language, has changed in my own lifetime. I'm sure for some of you, it's changed even more so than for me. No offense intended, but I'm aware of how our language has changed. When I was a kid, Zoom was a program on PBS. It was not, I couldn't even conceive of doing something like this. So what is our first principle? We'll do the children's versions. This is the teenage versions. So the 5 basic principles: God is all good and active in everything, everywhere. Number 2, I am naturally good because God's divinity is in me and in everyone. 3, I create my experiences by what I choose to think and feel and believe. 4, through affirmative prayer and meditation, I connect with God and bring out the good in my life. 5, I do and give my best by living the truth I know. I make a difference. So that's the teen version of the 5 basic principles. I went back to the website to make sure I had the most current version. So, number 1, God is all there is and present everywhere. This is the force of love and wisdom that underlies all of existence. Now, I'm a visual learner. If you're sort of struggling with this idea of all there is and everywhere present, let me give you a couple images to consider. This is based on Emily Cady's Lessons in Truth. She talks about God as being the hub of a wheel, and all the spiritual and religious paths are on the edge of the wheel. So it may appear that we are looking at cross purposes, that we're going to T-bone somebody, or that we're going to have a head-on collision, because we're coming from slightly different understandings and different, traditions, different practices, different rites, things like that. But that at the end of it, when you boil all of religious and spiritual paths down to the core, I believe it was Ram Dass who said that we are all walking each other home. So the idea that we are working into that attaining a greater awareness and understanding and expression of God in, through, and as us into the world. And this blew my mind when I first saw it, because I had come out of a tradition that was very narrow and very much, if you didn't follow a particular path, then you were, condemned for all eternity, however long that was. So it's very much an idea that there's room for a variety of beliefs. That's not to say that you will necessarily hear other traditions from our pulpits or from our workshops. We do have some basic ideas, but we're not going to condemn you or tell you that you have to change. That the idea is here that you are in expression and you are that decider of how your spiritual path looks for you. Some of you know me well enough to know that I have this thing about frogs. You may have noticed, if you're newer, you may have noticed on the bottom of my signature line, it says first rely on God, F-R-O-G. I don't mean it as an idol or as a point of worship. It is a visual reminder to myself of what is first and what comes second. And first is turn within and check in with that divine part of me, that God part. And then, I'm segueing into the next principle, but that whole idea is there's space for that. It doesn't have to be for everyone. It works for me. That's part of my path. Others may find that certain types of meditation or yoga help them find that idea of God or oneness or beingness, or however you choose to call God in yourself. That's perfectly fine too. From my home church in Mississauga, an artist named Cease Chin made this many years ago. And as you can see, it represents the unity of world paths and reminds us that, we are open and we are all on this path together. And I know that's a phrase we've been using a lot, but we were using it before COVID, and it still works. Our second principle: human beings are divine at their core and therefore inherently good. Everyone breathe. I know that I have struggled with this one, and I acknowledge that. And I worked in the court system for 12 years. And that was my spiritual experience, was putting this principle into practice with everyone that I met, with every person that I arraigned on charges, with every item that I took that had been used to harm someone in as evidence, that I understood that at the core of their being, they were inherently good. There were just poor choices made that did not result in that goodness being expressed in its fullness. And I'm sure we'll have some discussion about that in a few minutes. Thoughts have creative power to determine events and attract experiences. Again, I'm going to breathe through that one, because for me, sometimes there are experiences that I go, I didn't ask for this. I know that living through a global pandemic was never on my bucket list for this life that I was aware of. Now, maybe at some deep level, I came in with that idea. I don't know. But in terms of my personal handwritten list, it wasn't on there. So when that happens, my response has been to say, okay, what is the gift that this opportunity, that this experience is teaching me? What is the gift that I am receiving from going through this pandemic? What is the gift that I am receiving in being in a lockdown where I'm spending more time with myself than probably in my whole life? So having the opportunity to look around us and see what what the opportunities are for us, and to say, let's focus on the good things. It's like a magnet that as we look to the positive, as we look to that which brings us wholeness and healing and peace of mind and calm, that as we focus on that, we're going to attract more of that rather than the what ifs and ain't it awfuls. And focusing on those, I have noticed, tend to multiply them as well. So the idea that as we think, as we focus, so things happen. Prayer and meditation keep us aligned with the one great power in the universe. This has been a core for me. This was something I learned early on in my time in Unity. And what I appreciated in Unity, as I came through, I indicated earlier that I was kind of intellectual. I came out of a very Bible-oriented group that were very concerned with that you prayed correctly in this order and that you said these words in this order, things like that. What I loved was that in Unity, I could just sit quietly and say, I'm here, and just be quiet and not worry about the ritual, not worry about getting the words right, that I could speak from my heart and not be concerned that God wouldn't understand. I saw a great picture. I wish I had stolen it off of Facebook where there's a sign and it just says, Dear God, and then there's chaos of letters, just letters all over. Love me. And then the next picture is another one of those signs. Dear child, I understand. Love God. And that to me was where I was when I came into Unity, was I couldn't find words for prayer and meditation. And not having to find the words and not concerning myself that I was doing it right. That was such a relief for me to just get into that space of breathing and just finding where I felt connected, where I felt that I was in the state of oneness. Over the years, I've had opportunities where my first reaction could have been fright or flight, and my first reaction has been prayer. And that has taken some practice, and sometimes I don't achieve that. But just that idea that that is our core, and we'll talk about that prayer and meditation in greater depth next week, or next time in 2 weeks. But that's our core, that's our founding. And finally, it is not enough to understand spiritual teachings. We must live the truth we know. It's not about being in a seat on Sunday or whenever you're watching the service. It's about taking what we learn metaphysically in our spiritual life, in our prayer life, in our meditation time, and putting feet on it. Someone said that Unity is the ministry that rolls up its sleeves and gets to work. Come out of prayer and something tells you to call a friend, that you pick up the phone, you call them. One of the spiritual practices I was taught when I was going through school was drive home a different way. Learn to let go of the routine and open yourselves to, being in a different space and listening to guidance and respond to people in a loving way as best you can in the moment. And for me personally, it's made a big difference in my life as to how I think my life would have been without Unity. So those are the 5 principles with a little bit of editorializing on my part. And I'm going to stop the recording at this point, and we're going to go through these one at a time and open the floor to discussion.